I was in a ship and we were moving through the solar system. I was looking around. I was fascinated. Wow, there's Saturn, and now we're moving even beyond that. And they're kind of telling me and informing me as we go, like, now we're outside of your solar system, and now we're moving even further, and we're going beyond what people on Earth know of. I just want to be there, and I don't ever want to leave there. Can we go there? And they were like, well, no, that's not really what this is for, but now you know it's here. Now look from a bigger perspective.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here today with Lindsey Scharmyn. Thank you for joining me, Lindsay.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. You and your audience are so lovely. And I'm so glad that this exists for people to tap into what's good, true, and beautiful in this life. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much for being willing to do this. So you've had a couple of out-of-body near-death experiences, but I'm wondering what your life was like before those experiences. Have you always had contact with the spiritual realm?
I see it that way. It didn't always seem that way to me necessarily, or it wasn't in the forefront of my mind. And, there's sort of a circuitous roundabout path to where I am now as a, experiencer and practitioner and a spiritual healer for others and a teacher of the spiritual, ways, traditions, and life. So looking back, it's easy to see it. But at the time, when I was a child, it didn't seem anything special. I didn't know really that I was even interacting with and having conversations with these extra dimensional entities, whatever you want to call them, my spiritual guides and allies. But now I can see that very clearly. I can look back and I can see that I was talking to plants and animals and just beings, and that I was always in this discourse with that sort of other side of things. But again, it didn't seem that way. I didn't really have a spiritual teacher or guide or anything. And it became clear to me that other people didn't really have that same experience or relationship that I did. And so those things, I think, kind of got pushed away almost. I think a lot of us sort of learned to sort of suppress some of that. I think we're all born with more of a connection to the divine and the spiritual realms. And life sort of teaches us that that's not what this society, at least, is paying attention to or valuing. And so we all do that. And I think I did that too. And then I had a lot of trauma in my childhood and a lot of, imbalance. And so I went down into some darker paths for a while too, which was even less connected, I would say, to some of the positive aspects of the spiritual world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting. So you had an out-of-body experience around the age of 15 or 16. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, I had a couple right around that time. I had a lot going on at that time,
Okay.
actually. So, and someone asked me once, have you ever had a near death experience? And I said, no. I mean, I'm not in the way that I had learned about them, where someone, is struck or has a heart attack or just something happens that their body physically dies and it's medically diagnosed, and that, it's in the presence of EMTs or whoever else, and they have this experience and they come back. But I explained my experience that seems to me similar to what people go through. And, people were like, yeah, that's a near death experience too. So, people can take it or leave it if they put it in that category or not. But basically, around that age, I had this experience where I left my body. And I, at the time I was having a lot of these experiences, and I just thought they were exceptionally vivid dreams, like realer than real, realer than reality, but still just dreams. That's kind of how I explained it to myself, because again, I didn't have anyone or anything to sort of help me understand what was going on otherwise. But I found myself out of body, and I found myself in like an infinite expanse of darkness, basically. It wasn't scary. It wasn't bad. I didn't feel threatened by it, but it was just, I could tell that it went forever, literally. But way off in the distance, I could see like this pinprick of light. And so similar to like the light at the end of the tunnel, but that is not what I was thinking at the time. I was just thinking, well, what's that? If this is all just nothing, like what is that thing there? I want to know what that is. So I started moving towards it. And in this dimension, it's like to think of something is to do it. So I was imagining moving towards it. I just was moving towards it. And at some point I thought, oh, I'm never going to reach this point. It's not getting very much bigger as I'm moving. So then I had to like hypercharge I was like, no, let's move as fast as we can to this thing. So I started rushing through this darkness, and this light is slowly getting bigger and bigger. As this is happening, I'm realizing there's some consciousness. Again, didn't feel threatening at all, but I could tell that it was aware of what I was doing and that it was going to stop me basically and bring me back to my body. So I was like, now I was in a hurry too. Like, I want to find that light before this thing gets to me and brings me back. So I'm now like just zooming as fast as I can, slowly getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I finally am getting close enough. It's getting larger and larger. And I finally get to it. And to me, it looks exactly like a window. And the window is into this other world. And when I look through the window, there's hills, a river, some trees, this beautiful sky, and it's all literally gold, just golden light. It's the brightest things I've ever seen. I could feel how much I just wanted to go lay in that grass and go sit by that river for eternity. Like I felt homesick, but I didn't really know it at the time. I just knew like I want to be there so bad. And I was really actually then upset that this window was preventing me from just going into that place. And I remember even thinking like, well, it's just glass. Can I break it? Can I go through? And then I felt that energy that I had felt a little earlier that had been sort of coming after me or wanting to return me to my body. And it was very gentle. It's very almost like fatherly and or motherly, maybe even. It was just parental. And it was like, yeah, it's time for you to go back now. This isn't where you're supposed to be. And I just was then back in my body like instantly. It wasn't the same travel back as it had been to get to the light. And when I woke up, it was like an infinite sadness because I had seen that place and I had felt it. And this place where we are in 3 dimensions and linear time, it's not as easy. It's not as bright. And it's not as all encompassingly loving as that place had been. And kind of was a bit obsessed with it for a while. I drew a lot of pictures of it. I was very much wanting to go back there. And I was a little bit miffed at whatever it was that had brought me back to my body.
Do you have any thoughts on who that consciousness was?
Well, now I know that it's one of my main spiritual guides, and
Mm.
I can share who it is if you would like. Yeah, and so I experienced this being as Lao Tzu, which is Chinese ancient Chinese mystical spiritual teacher and famous for the Tao Te Ching. And I didn't know that at the time, definitely. And I also took me a long time into my adult life to realize exactly who that was. And that's its own kind of funny. I'm a little bit dense sometimes. As much as people think like, oh, you're spiritually connected, you have all of this. It's like sometimes things still take a while to come through to me.
So when you said that you got to the light and it was a window into another world, that's really fascinating to me because there's only one other person, like one other near-death experiencer I've heard say something like that. She was on the Art Bell show like back in the 90s and her name was Sarah, and that's all I know about her, but she also found herself at a window looking into another world that was much like you describe it, and she was told that she didn't have enough experience to enter.
Uh, that makes sense to me as well. I've never heard anyone actually. So I'm glad to hear someone else had that experience that's similar. Usually if people are just moving into the light, like they almost are conscious of the moment of moving into the light itself. Like it's kind of at the end of the tunnel, but it's also pretty immediate. It doesn't take them much time to do it. And in my experience and maybe in hers, it took a long time. I wasn't even in the same dimension, I think, for a while, but my will like pushed through and got me to that place. And it was kind of the sense of like, well, no, you're not ready yet. You're not even supposed to be here yet. Like sometime, sure. And again, I had that feeling of homesickness. So I also knew at some level, at least starting then, that like I had come from there. Maybe all of us have come from there to be incarnated into this life because there's this deep sense of wanting to return. Right? There wasn't so much a
Mhm.
sense of like, oh, I've never been there and I can't wait to get there. It's like I want to go back there. So
Right.
that was indicative too, I think, of things that later became more obvious to me, that we do have these in between life times where we get to be somewhere that's a bit different from where we are
Mm.
here. But yeah, my other sort of out of body and maybe near death is a good way to describe it experience is also interesting to me in that I had never heard anyone else describe anything like this until I interviewed someone on my show named Peter Panagore. I don't know if you've interviewed him. Yeah. And
Yes, I
so
love him.
he's so cool and his
Mhm.
story is so amazing. And he was telling me his story and he got to the point and I just was stunned. I was like, that's exactly what happened to me because I've never heard anyone else describe it. But, I had a little bit different experience than him too. And I can share that experience as well if you'd like.
Yeah, is that the second I don't know if you call it a near-death experience?
I didn't really call either of them a near-death experience, but that one I just described is very similar to some people's near-death
Mhm,
experience, and this one is too, but like I said, neither of them I didn't experience dying, but I
mhm,
definitely was outside of my body, and I was still intact as a consciousness and
right.
fully awake and aware, and so there are a lot of similarities at least. And in both of them, I had that sort of guidance that I think a lot of people experience when they have a near-death experience, where there's angels or loved ones or spirit guides or allies that are there with you. Of course, in that first one, I was more running away from mine,
Mhm.
but in this next one, I wasn't so much, and they were actually a group of them, and they were taking me to have this experience. So
Okay, I would love it if you would share that one.
yeah, so this one was a bit more intense, and this one also left me with sort of a more deeper knowing that this wasn't just a dream, and maybe none of these things had ever been just dreams, which was in itself pretty profound for me at the time. But what happened was, again, I was sleeping, and again, I found myself out of body. And again, it's that I know so many people say it, but it is really realer than real. It's realer than reality. You feel finally like things really make sense and that this is the actual, experience that maybe we should be having or just are having at some other level, whatever that feeling is, it's a very good feeling. And I found myself in like a ship. And so then some people might want to start classifying this as an abduction experience or a UFO experience, but that's not really my experience of it. It is more of a sort of astral or consciousness or my soul traveled somewhere more than my body didn't go anywhere as far as I know. So, but I was in a ship and we were moving through the solar system. And I remember three different beings. One of them was Lao Tzu, I now know, but at the time didn't know who that was. And two others of a same sort of energy level of like the ascended master or almost angelic sort of feeling. And I wasn't too concerned about who they were. I was more concerned with how cool it was that I was moving through the solar system in a ship. So I was looking around. I was fascinated. I was like, wow, there's, Saturn and here's this. And now we're moving even beyond that. And they're kind of telling me and informing me as we go, like now we're outside of your solar system and now we're moving, even further and we're going beyond what people on Earth know of. And we're going deep, deep, over here. And the language wasn't so important. The names of places wasn't so important. It was more just that we get to this sort of certain place. And so we get very far out. And, there's like nebula and things that I don't at that point in my life, and maybe people can relate or not, but this is like 1994 or six or something. I didn't have the internet. There wasn't a lot of I guess, like, movies and stuff, I don't know, I didn't have cable. I had never seen nebulas and star fields and things that we now can look at the Hubble telescope and see quite easily, and everyone's seen pictures of, but at the time, it wasn't so much that. So, I was seeing things that had never seen before, and we got to what I feel like is the center of the universe, and they were like, "Look." And I looked, and the ship is very interesting because it's solid and not. It's solid when it needs to seem solid, and then it's totally completely transparent when you don't need it to be a ship, but you wanna see, right? So, just as soon as they said, "Look, it's just open," and I'm looking, and there's just the brightest brightness I can't describe honestly how bright it was and how big it was because what we had just moved through to come through this, all that space, all that area of universe, this was like nearly as big as that, but it was all just light. And I could tell if I really focused that there's actually trillions or uncountable stars or galaxies or whatever this brightness was, but really it just looks like one giant brightness. It's impossible. We don't have words for it because I don't even know if we acknowledge that this exists as a physical aspect of the universe. But in this experience, like that's real, and that's the center of all things, is what I call it now. Because I don't even know if universe is the right word for like how big and massive this was. And I was in awe of it, and I was speechless, and I don't know in linear time, like, how long I just stayed. It's almost like that window, like, my hands are just, like, up against it, and I'm just, like, staring and, like, "This is everything. This is beyond comprehension. This is light," and I had that same feeling of, like, I just wanna be there, and I don't ever wanna leave there, and, "Can we go there?" And they were like, "Well, no, that's not really what this is for, but now it's here." And they're like, "Now look, you know, from a bigger perspective, it's not just the light, what else is around it?" And I saw that all the rest of the universe comes out from that point, like a figure eight. So on either end, it's coming out like an hourglass is more like it because it's, swirling out wider and wider as you go. And it's omnidirectional. And so this light at the center of all things has two sort of flare out sections of universe of where planets and stars and galaxies are. And that was mind blowing to me too. Again, I've never seen a conception of the universe like that, but I know in my heart that that is exactly what it is. If we could physically go out there right now together, I have no doubt that's what we would see because that's what I saw. That's what I was shown. And I just never really wanted to leave there. But eventually, they're like, well, we have to go back. And so we're heading back and they pointed and we're off from my perspective. It would be the right side, the right hourglass, side of things. And they were pointing way towards the end actually. And they're like, that's where you guys, like, that's where the Milky Way and Earth is. And we're like way out. We're very far from the bright center of all things. As far as things go, we're almost as far as you can be, pretty far out there. And they're like, that's where you live. And a part of me felt sad about that. And so I'm not really sure why. And maybe there is something to that about our distance from this center of all things that is like a little bit more disconnected or harder to connect to, or I'm not sure, but it felt a little bit sad to me. It wasn't horrible, but it's just a little bit sad. Maybe it's just sad that I had to leave the center of all things and go back home and just sort of like the experience looking through the window at heaven. And so coming back was a flash. I mean, I think on the way there, they purposely sort of slowed down just to show me like, here's how far we're going and here's, what we're moving through. But we just were back home in a flash. I don't think they need to take any time to go anywhere they want to. I think they just can be there. So we were back and I was looking down at Earth and they sort of paused and they said, where or how do you want to return? You can choose any of these. And I looked closer and the Earth was a globe and it was covered in like infinite little tornadoes. Like if you were looking down and every tornado just touched rim to rim and the whole earth was just tornadoes. And each of those I came to understand was a timeline that this consciousness, Lindsey Scharmyn, could live. And I got to choose which one I would go back to. It didn't have to be the one I left from. And it was so confusing to me. I was like, well, okay, if that's real, how could I possibly take on the responsibility of choosing one of them? There's clearly infinite of them. And I don't know which one is best to choose, I have no idea. And they said, well, we can help you if you want to ask questions about like which or what. And I said, well, can you just point me to the one that is the best outcome for myself and for everyone? And they were like, everyone like your family? And I was like, no, everyone. And they were like, well, that's that one. And I said, okay. And I just head first dove back into it, like without a thought. And I came back to my body and I woke up and I was like, what? That just happened. I was like, I don't know. That was the craziest, longest, most intense, very vivid dream I've ever had, or the universe is a lot weirder than I thought. And like there's things going on that I have to probably consider. And well, so much, and we can talk about any of that more. But what was really interesting for me is really shortly after that, I got some sort of Nova, which is a TV show and it's science stuff. And I got like a VHS of some Nova episode about the stars and galaxies or what. And I was watching it and it was like blowing my mind. I was like, that's exactly what I saw, actually. And it was striking to me. So it really reinforced for me at the time that it wasn't just a dream, that I had actually gone somewhere to real places that actually exist and had been shown all of this for some purpose. So changed my whole life, really.
Wow, Lindsay, thank you so much for sharing. I have to tell you that I have pre-birth memories of the light, and just listening to you is bringing back all the emotion. It's just I cannot convey how that felt. And also when you talked about the earth being so far away from it and that feeling of having to leave and go so far away, also remember feeling that as well.
I'm now feeling it even more that you're saying that. It's hard, I think, for those of us who are so connected to that light, because I don't want to say it's rare to have the light in this world, in this experience. It is more rare, and it maybe even is like a little bit dimmed. And it's not many people who get to really feel that again and reemerge in that feeling. And I think we carry it with us, honestly, in our heart.
Mhm.
In fact, I've gotten way more clarity about that as time has gone on, that same exact brightness, it is no different. It's like quantumly entangled with that center of all things. So when we really know that, we can feel it, we can connect with it. But not everyone knows that. And it's rare maybe that anyone can like mirror that back or bring it out. And so it's really beautiful when we get to feel it again. So thank you for
Mhm.
saying that. It made it even stronger for me too.
Of course. So, do you think that you were in the astral realm when that happened? Do you think that it's actually a physical light that we could find if we could go far enough in our spaceships, or is it in another dimension?
I think it's all those things. I don't mean to like have a cop out sort of answer, but I really do think that. I think if we could get in our ships and fly, we could get there and we could find it. We could be there physically. I think that astrally you can travel there and it's not really any different. And I also think that there's an other dimensional quality of it, and that, you know, the more ascended we are, like the ascended masters, like these angelic beings, the easier it is, the faster it is, the more brightly we can carry it with us as we go. And I just think all those things are true. I get asked sometimes too, like, well, is it out of body, or is it astral projection, or is it vivid dreams, or is it lucid dreams? And I have the same sort of answer, like it's all of those things. And we all do all of those things. We don't always remember it or recall it, but every night we're traveling somewhere in our consciousness, and it can be vaguely remembered and then we just think of it as a dream, or it can be more strongly remembered and then we might think of it as a lucid dream, or it can be experienced exactly like reality and we think of it as an astral travel or an out of body experience. And I just think those are all spectrums of our own consciousness and the way that we experience any given thing, and that we are interdimensional, multidimensional beings. Even if you just look at it on the face of it, like here's our body and there's our soul. And those are two different dimensions of experience. So that's my complicated answer.
Yeah, that was wonderful. What do you think would have happened if you had gone into the light?
I think you lose a bit of your idea of self. When we talk about
Mm.
ego death in various different levels of spiritual experience, I think that's a taste of it. And I think if you go too close to the light or you remerge with the light, you lose it completely. And you're not Lindsey Scharmyn anymore. You're not Melissa Denise anymore. You're, the light. And I really think that that is what all of us are, but we're a little bit separated from it when we're identified as ourselves, and it's harder for us to maybe conceive of that. And I think that's the same way, a different way of saying that same idea of like, well, you haven't had enough experience yet to get back to this light, right? Like you didn't
Mm.
finish what you differentiated from the light in order to experience. So keep going. You'll come back eventually.
That makes so much sense, and you've really filled in the blanks for me with my understanding of how all this is set up. Because some near-death experiencers will just experience more of an astral realm, like a physical, like paradise type place. And then other people will go to this place of like no self and no time. And so I've always kind of had this question, well, how are all of these things connected and why do people go to different places? And based on what you're saying, it's all part of the same thing. It's just different places in the universe.
Yeah. And different experiences of it based on your specific development and your specific goals, right? Where you're headed and what you came to do or what you're about to do next. And I hear some of these experiences too that are very intricate. Like first I went through this gate and that cleansed me of my negative emotions. And then I went through this next gate and that cleansed me of this other stuff. And then I went through the gate that cleansed me of my identity altogether. And it's like and other people are like, "Oh, I just went to the light and it was awesome. I got to hang out with my, dog and my, like, family and all these people who had passed, and then I came back." And, I and then there's also the people who go and come back and really didn't like the experience. And there's people who go and, like, wanna go back to the experience and don't like this experience. So it is really, I just think, very personal, and it is exactly what each person, I think, needs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did you go back to the timeline that you came from, or did you go back to a different one?
Totally different one. Yeah. Totally different one, and I just know that because their energy and faces when I chose this one were kinda like, "Alright, I mean, if that's
Oh,
what you want."
interesting.
Yeah. So I just have known that that's sort of different than what it would have been, and there's been a few moments in this life where I've come pretty close to death, and I've wondered if that's, like, some of the veering off that other timelines would have been, like, this one goes
Mm.
longer is one of the differences. But yeah, and I've since then felt like I've switched timelines again a few times, so I'm not sure, but not as obviously as that time where I was literally given, like, a choice, like, "You choose which one."
Mm. So it's interesting that even though you went back to a different timeline, you still woke up in your bed, and I'm assuming most of your life was probably still seemed the same. So are the differences really subtle?
I think they're very subtle. I think a lot of them were in the future already, and I think also, you know, what one of the experiences I've had since then was of and it's somewhat hard to explain, but I was in really, really deep meditation. This wasn't even that long ago. I think this was a month or 2 ago. I was in very deep meditation and, now it's very easy for me. I'm very well practiced to go into that spiritual space and come back out again and interact with it. And so I was in a really deep meditation and I actually felt like a new timeline come up and like present itself to me. Like, here you can step right now really easily into this other one. And my higher self and my guides were like, yeah, that's good, do that. And so I accepted it is the best way I can describe it. And as that was happening, I literally had a memory come up of what I'm guessing is the old timeline now. And as I was accepting that new timeline, I watched a new version of that memory come up. And I thought to myself, oh my God, which one is real? And then the old one just disappeared and the new one just came. And now I don't even remember what memory it was.
Oh,
But
that's
that's how
crazy.
seamless it became the timeline I've always been on, actually. And so that's the way I understand it now, is it's not they're all happening, and when I stepped into a new one way back then in that experience, that had been the one I was always on. Who knows what in my past, in fact, changed in order to make it this new timeline. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you have
Okay.
the memories of the new timeline now.
Yes, and none of the memories of the old one. And if I did, I can still remember that feeling of it like, it's almost like insanity, like, it's not okay. Like, your mind is just not you cannot hold both at once. You have to choose one. So if I were to gain the memories of the wrong timeline, I feel like it would be psyche shattering. I don't think it'd be good for me or anybody. So some people ask like, well, how do you know, what if you want to remember the other stuff? And I'm like, I don't think you want to remember the other stuff. I don't think that's good. I think you just stick with the one you're on. That's cool.
That does make sense. I could see it causing a lot of problems. Let's say if there were people in your previous timeline that you didn't have the same relationship with in this one or something like that.
Yeah. And there's another interesting thing that I forgot to mention when I was coming back into my body from going to the center of all things. I It was very quick in my experience, but there was a lot packed into it. It was like as I was moving closer to my body in physical reality or linear time, I was seeing a timeline go in reverse. And I could see like dates. It was as though it was literally on a line and I could see the numbered years and I was going backwards through them to get to my body. And on the way, if I looked, I could see parts of what was going to happen. And so when I got to my body, I was remembering that in the other direction. I was remembering it in the order it was going to then occur in this life. And none of it was very meaningful. It wasn't like big moments like, oh, here's when this thing is going to happen and almost kill you, or here's when this thing is going to happen. It's going to be like this, like the birth of your nephew or whatever. No, it was just like, there you are standing around a fire with this guy, drinking a beer or something. Like it was very just mundane, pointless things. But I remembered all of them. I don't think I even wrote them down or anything. But as I've gone through life, when I get to them, I'm like, oh, here's another one that I saw way back then, coming to be. And so that's been really weird too. It's been especially weird, I think, because none of them have seemed to matter at all. They're not big moments, they're just pointless moments.
Do you think maybe they do have a meaning that we're just not aware of from this perspective?
Maybe, and that's been another one of my thoughts, like, are those actually moments where things splinter? Is
Mm.
every moment a moment where things splinter into multiple timelines depending on what you do? And I've asked my guides and allies about this many times, and what they show me is like let's just say that same sort of line, right? It's just a one straight line, and there's points on it, and some of these points are like fixed. You're going to hit that point no matter what. Like literally no matter what. You could choose anything at any moment. You could do the least expected thing, like run out in the street and start banging pots and screaming, and still you're going to get to this point. And those points exist for all of us, but the lines between each point are infinite. So they kind of like spread out like all of these lines and then they come back together at each of those points. So that's how I've seen it. And I don't know if any of those little mundane seeming points that I seem to see were those points of that can't be changed or something else. I'm not sure. Or if they were just meant to show me like you already knew. You already knew where you're going in this life. You picked this.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, you also have some past life memories, correct?
Yes.
What has your experience been with that? Like maybe we could start at the beginning and what was your first experience with a past life memory?
Yeah, it's been never something that I have intentionally consciously chosen. So I always like to emphasize that. Like I didn't go to a past life reader, or I didn't, seek this out. And I also, again, similar time period to when I started having past life memories come back to some of these other experiences. This was really just an awakening time for me when I was, between 14 and 16 and so. But so I didn't go seeking them. I didn't even know what they were. I didn't know what past lives were. And I knew, I'm sure I'd heard of it or something, but I just didn't think about it or didn't really believe in it or didn't care. So when they are happening at first, I'm not even really sure like what this is or why it feels so significant to me. But the first one was again in a dream. And so some people will say like, oh, that's just a dream. But I know better now to know, like we said, there's the whole gamut of consciousness in that state. So you can go from just dream to, full on out of body astral traveling through the universe. And it's all just a spectrum, right? So I am in this experience, and the way it looked to me was that I was looking at, the current modern time at that time, and I was just on a city street, and there's cars and buildings, and then there just appeared a sepia toned window, And when the sepia toned window, the concrete sidewalk became wooden platform, and the buildings of concrete and brick became just wooden. And it looked to me like cowboy times and like, the Wild West. And a car would drive and it hit the window, it'd become like a horse drawn carriage. And I was like, wow. And so I wanted to know more. So I went into the sepia toned picture, and now I'm in that time, but I instantly, instead of being on the street, I'm actually like in I don't know, an apartment inside of a building. I feel like I was above a saloon. I knew my whole sort of life story in this experience. I knew who I was. My name was Elizabeth, and I was brushing my hair in the mirror. I had this long, black, beautiful hair, and I was very proud of it. And I was very pretty. And I also knew I was very scared and terrified. And then I realized, as I'm kind of losing Lindsey Scharmyn and becoming Elizabeth more and more, I realized my husband's behind me and he's acting really weird. And I'm starting to understand that he has figured out that I'm having an affair. I don't even think I was fully having the affair. I think it was more an affair of the heart, but it was going to become a more significant affair. And he had realized that and figured that out. And he was sort of toying with me, letting me know that he knew. He was already somewhat abusive. And so that's why it was so terrifying to me to wonder, like, what's he going to do now? And how am I going to get out of it? And then I also became aware the person who I was having this affair with was right out in the hallway. Like they had maybe also realized something was going to happen. Maybe they were going to try to stop anything bad from happening. I'm not exactly sure, but I was just like willing them to stay away because I felt like that would make things way worse. It would make him even more inflamed, and that he might kill us both. But that if he just would stay away and not come in and whatever, and then I could maybe talk myself out of it, and then maybe we could run away in the night. And I was just, all of these things are going through my mind in great detail. And then he walked over to me and he picked up his straight razor and he cut my throat. There's just no warning at all. And then I experienced that death, which was really, really traumatic, as you might imagine. It is, in my experience, it felt no different than what I feel like it would feel if that happened to me right now. So when I came out of this experience, and again, I was like, why do I have such crazy dreams? Like, why is this happening to me? Why did I experience that as though it was me? Why does it feel like it really happened? And then I had this series of, depression and fear and anger then and rage. Like I went through all of the emotion of that really happening to me, I think, right? I think that's what it would be like. And it was like, well, why do I have to experience all of this in such great detail? And at some point, I just realized, oh, I did experience all of that, and I'm just remembering it now. And then I could kind of explore it more. Like, oh, so if past lives are real, if that was me, then what does that have to do with this me now? And then I realized who my husband was in that life, but in this current life is a totally different person in my life that I don't like to get into publicly, but it's really fascinating. We have a very similar relationship almost. And that's really interesting. And then I also started to see how some things in this life that had never really made sense to me come from that trauma, come from that life and that murder and that experience. And one of those was a really severe sensitivity of my neck. If anyone came near my neck, I would like automatically deflect, like just really protective. If someone actually ended up touching my neck, I would pretty well freak out, like an anxiety attack. And I was always just like, I don't know, my neck's just really sensitive. I just don't want anyone to touch my neck. Well, you wouldn't if someone had done that to you, right? That's a pretty major wound. So it finally made sense. I mean, nothing in this current life as Lindsay had ever been involved with my neck, but that had been. And what's even weirder to me at the time, but makes perfect sense now, is that as I went through that fear and released it, I went through the anger and released it, I went through all of that, and I healed that trauma on accident just by feeling it in this life and reconnecting with it. I didn't have this anymore. Anyone can touch my neck now. I don't have any sensitivity there. So this real, actual experience in this life was released by healing the trauma of that past life. And that's been so significant for me because that actually becomes eventually, didn't know it at the time, but now that's the bulk of what I do with people in spiritual healing is helping them to recall their past lives and heal the traumas related to it so that this current life you can be even more free and healed.
Wow, that's fascinating. Why do you think it is that we have to heal those traumas in the body? I've often wondered if it wouldn't be easier to just do it in between lives outside the body.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple parts of that. And one, I think anyone can really relate to this if they think about it. We store our trauma in our body if we don't deal with it. And that's really what trauma is, negative experiences, we project onto them negativity, at least we feel negative about them, that we didn't process and release. We didn't allow them to flow in and through and out. And so we held onto them, we suppressed them, we disconnected from them, we dissociated from them, we pretended like they didn't happen, whatever we did. And then it gets stuck. And at first, it just gets stuck in our sort of field, right? I call it like the auric field or in our information field. It could just be there. And the longer we don't release it, the more dense it gets until it just becomes like stuck. And maybe it's in our shoulder, or maybe it's in our heart, or maybe it's in our hair. I mean, it can be in any physical part of us. That one's pretty obvious. It was in my neck because that's where the wound was. That's often the case, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it goes to the organ related to that emotion or something like that. But, it kind of condenses the more we avoid it and ignore it. I like to say, like, none of these things just goes away on their own. Like, we have to move through them. And I think that's part of, too, the other part of it. The other answer to the question is that, if it was allowed to be just sort of dissolved and dismissed and released, like, what would have been the point in experiencing it in the first place? And our souls and our consciousness is much wiser than we might give it credit for. And it's setting up these experiences for very specific reasons. And some people like to think of that as lessons. Like you have to learn your lessons. And I think that's a decent way to think of it. I think the way that I have learned to think of it more and it makes more sense to me is just karma. We're just learning cause and effect. We're just learning cause and effect. That is the only lesson, actually. And it's really teaching us to be exceptionally present and intentional in every single thing we create, every thought, every word, every action, every feeling, because everything we create comes back to us. And what I've learned from other past life memories that have also come back unbidden and unintentionally, as far as my conscious mind goes, is that we often make huge mistakes and we act in ways that now in this life we might not even relate to. We're like, oh no, I'm this good, loving, beautiful person. I would never do that. But in some life, we did do that. Right. And so that often is a cause and it comes back to us as an effect of experiencing the same type of suffering we created for others in some other point in time. So either way, right, the lesson, the karma, the honing of our creative abilities into something that is more productive for all instead of just reactive in the moment. I think these are all sort of good ways to look at why we do that and why it can't just erase itself, every time we make a mistake.
Really appreciate you breaking that down for us. I know we're getting a little bit close to our time here, but is there any other past life that's been really significant for you?
Yeah, I think one of the more significant ones for me was just like that, what we were just saying, where I made some really, really intense mistakes. And in this life currently as Lindsay, I've been sort of, I wouldn't say obsessed, but somewhat preoccupied with why and how people ever get to the point where they would torture one another. Cause I just do not understand what's ever going to be worth that. There's nothing that I just doesn't make sense to me. And so it's interesting that I've had that preoccupation. I had this life come back to me that was the hardest one for me to accept so far, because in that life, I was a torturer. And I mean, I don't know if there's a title for that, or maybe I knew it when I was experiencing that life. But what was horrifying to experience as Lindsay, remembering this life and re experiencing it, was that I liked it. I thought I was good at it. I thought I was doing a really good job for my society and my community and my people, and that this needed to be done. And all of this, and I enjoyed it, and that's so disturbing for me now. It's so foreign to me, it's so disturbing, but I also developed compassion because I was that person, and I experienced why the person did why I chose that, why it felt good to me, and then I also experienced the moment in that life where I realized what I was doing was not just physical, and it was not just socio-political, but it was emotional, it was spiritual, it was mental, and it was like a spiritual awakening, and maybe one of the hardest ones because then I had to accept that I had just done all of that in this completely misguided understanding of what life was and what we are and what we're doing here. And that crushed me in that life. To have that realization crushed me. Also because in that life I couldn't figure out a way out of it. I didn't know how to leave that. I would be thrown in the dungeons and tortured if I defected or, stopped doing it. So it was a really hard position to be in. And so I kind of saw all of that and had compassion for all of that. And as I was experiencing that, as I was kind of leaving that experience, it was a very strange, and this hasn't happened in any of my other past life memories, but I was experiencing being Lindsay again, but leaving that life and seeing me as that person, having that realization and wanting to commit suicide. And as Lindsay, I was able to just sort of like scream some energy out as I was coming back to this life. And I don't know if that's usually allowed or how it goes, but I was like, don't give up. It's going to get better. You're going to get through this. The light accepts you and loves you no matter what. It's going to be okay. Just don't make it worse. And then I left. And I don't know for sure what happened. I didn't have the memory of the rest of that life, but I feel like that mattered. I feel like I actually affected that. I feel like maybe I didn't commit suicide in that life because of this feeling like something loves me and something honors me, even though I did all of this. Well, again, in this life, I was like, well, why did I have this memory? Now I know the drill at this point. There's a reason, there's a trauma to heal. That seems kind of obvious. Like the trauma of torturing other people is pretty bad. But I also then realized in this current life as Lindsay, I was tortured as a small child by a dentist and very intentionally, very specifically, very deeply tortured. And I actually, part of why I experienced so much darkness later in my life and, had to go through PTSD and healing from that was from this experience. And I had always had the same question. Why? Why did he do that to me? Right? Like what how do you do that? And then I realized, well, that's probably why I always had this question of why do people torture each other? Because that happened to me. PTSD, part of it, you sort of dissociate and sort of forget. You never really forget, but you can like really, really detach from it. So I just put it all together. I was like, I've always been fascinated with it because it happened to me in this life. And now I understand that it happened to me in this life, at least in part, because I did that to people in this other life. And there's just, like I said, that cause and effect. You put it out, it's going to come back to you. It's not a punishment. It's just the experience to see how powerful you are as a creator and what do you really want to create? Do you want to create negativity? If so, you can. No one's going to stop you. And you're going to have to experience it. Maybe not tenfold, but at least onefold. At least you experience it coming back. And as dark as that seems sometimes, and as hard as that is, and trauma healing is hard, it's really beautiful too. It's very elegant and it's full of grace, and you always have support through all of it. The spiritual masters, our angels, our spiritual guides, they're always right there to help. And you are there too. You can go to any life. You can go to your own future. You can go to yourself as a child, and you can bring that light that we talked about, that we all carry inside, to any point along that process. We're never alone.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure that one's not an easy one to remember or talk about, but I really think it does highlight the fact that I would probably say most of the time when people do things that we consider to be, that are horrible and evil, and we wonder how they can get to that point, in their minds, it's justified maybe because of the society that they were raised in, where it's considered a good thing, or it's just how things have always been done. And so I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as we're going through our collective awakening and people are starting to wake up and being understanding and holding space for those types of things, because there's things in our society now that some of us would look at and question, how could someone do that? And It's because to them it's just normal, or that's how they were raised or something like that. Not that those things are okay, but just understanding it's part of the awakening process.
Absolutely. And I still am not perfect. I still judge people. I still try not to. I do better and better all the time. But, that helps me have that compassion and see that exactly that it doesn't make it okay. It doesn't mean you excuse it, but you can have compassion for that person feels like this is the best thing they can do, right? Everybody's actually walking around doing the best they can do. And so isn't
Mhm.
that sad? And if you're in a different place that feels more healed than that, maybe the least we can do is have some love and compassion for it, is still hold people responsible. But honestly, even then I get to the point where I'm like, well, we don't even, in the end, we're all holding ourselves responsible. None of us is
Right.
getting out of our karma. It's going to come.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Would you like to share with the viewers where they can find you and anything you have going on?
Yes, thank you so much, Melissa. It's really nice to be here. You create such a beautiful and loving space, and I know your audience feels that too. So thank you for doing that. I would love to invite your audience to rogueways.org. It's rogue and ways as in pathways, not waves as in ocean waves. So rogueways.org is the site, and they can connect with me there. They can just send a message, ask a question. I do one-on-one work with people. I do the past life. Work with people. I do all sorts of spiritual healing, sound healing, tarot, and more. And I also have a special option for your audience specifically that I'd like to offer them. I really am big on offering people what they can use to work with themselves in their own life and for the rest of their life have these tools. And so I offer a dream walking course. And the goal of the course is for everybody to be able to access that level of their consciousness and that level of experience and set it to work for them so that we can answer any question we might have, that we can solve any problem that we might have, that we can even talk to and interact with our loved ones who have passed or our spiritual guides and allies and manifest more effectively. And we can do all of this through our dreams, and everybody's capable of doing it. So I would love to invite people to my dream walking course. It will start on February 4th. And it's 8 classes throughout the month that we meet. If you can meet, we meet one-on-one, or sorry, in a group, but live via Zoom. And then they're recorded. So you can, if you can't make it, you can still, get access to it. And you have access to me throughout the course too. And for your audience, I just want to offer them 25% off. So if they go to my site at rogueways.org and they go to book a session or book a soul service, the dream walking course will be the first service offered. And the price they're going to see is the reduced price. It is the 25% off price. I would love to offer them a coupon code like Love Covered Life, but this service I use doesn't have coupons. So the way I'm going to do it is just discount it between the release of this show and February 4th. It just will be discounted. So they can all just grab that at the 25% off rate. And I would love to see them there. I know it's going to change people's lives.
Lindsay, thank you so much. It's so kind of you to offer that discount. I'll have your links in the description. And again, thank you so much for being willing to share so vulnerably from your life and your experiences. And thank you for your kind words about my channel.
Oh, thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and comment with your thoughts and opinions, and check the description box for the links to my free community where I share lots of resources, my Pay What You Can community where we do classes and challenges together, my TikTok, Instagram, my Clips channel, and lovecoveredlife.com where I share my paintings. Thank you so much for your support.